Welcome back. We're diving into something quite profound today. You brought Lost Veda and Nāsadīya, the unborn paradox, to our attention. And it's really captivated me, this fusion of Malayalam poetics with Vedic philosophy, especially as its focus on the Nāsadīya Sūkta.
It's a rich text, definitely, and very carefully constructed.
Yeah. I mean, the Nāsadīya Sūkta, right? Rigveda 10.129, grapples with this really fundamental paradox. Existence, arising from, seeming non-existence. And that's where we're going today, to try to unpack this central mystery.
Exactly. And I think what makes this deep dive especially fascinating is how the text navigates this paradox. Through this really unique lens, the interplay of, the unborn aja, the self aham, and then that ultimate reality, the tad aham, all within this kind of dual linguistic framework.
Yeah. Because it's not just interpreting the Sūkta.
No, not at all.
It's a launching point for a deeply personal inquiry. At least that's how I felt reading it. Almost like a philosophical meditation,
Absolutely. Lost Veda and Nāsadīya takes the Nāsadīya Sūkta as its foundation. But it goes beyond simply explaining or analyzing the hymn. It's really embarking on a personal and philosophical exploration. And as we go through this deep dive, we're essentially joining the text on that very journey to unpack this central enigma.
Right. How can something emerge from what appears to be nothing? That's the question, isn't it?
It is. It's a question that has resonated through spiritual and philosophical traditions for centuries.
It has. And this text brings a unique perspective to that question. And for me, three ideas really stood out as I was reading it. The unborn, the aja, the self, the aham.
Yes.
And that singular truth, the tag ekam, they seem to almost unfold.
Unfold, exactly. That sense of gradual revelation, of layering, is very deliberate in the text.
And the way it uses language, the Malayalam and the Sanskrit, it's not just stylistic, right?
Not at all.
It feels fundamental to how this paradox is approached.
Precisely. The text very intentionally employs this linguistic duality. Malayalam, as it's used here, represents that personal space, the realm of individual experience. It's the language of laya, of dissolution, but also of prakasha, those flashes of insight.
And we see this so beautifully in that line in Malayalam. Ni endilvidyanada anandamaya pragashamai.
A beautiful line.
You bloom within me as infinite light.
Yes. It speaks to a profound yearning, a desire within the individual to transcend their limited sense of self, to touch something boundless. And it expresses that yearning, that aspiration in such a deeply personal way.
It does. And in contrast, the Sanskrit feels more cosmic.
Absolutely. The Sanskrit, in this context, embodies those grand abstract principles, the ones governing creation, sindhi, and the void, shunya. Think of how the Nāsadīya Sūkta itself begins, in Sanskrit, with that fundamental question. Nasabino sadasitadani, neither non-being nor being existed then.
Setting the stage for the entire paradox.
Precisely, from the very first line.
So we have these two languages, right, working together, but it's not just that they're side by side, it's more, interwoven.
Interwoven, yes. It's a deliberate fusion, and I think it creates a space where these two realms, the personal and the cosmic, can actually resonate with each other.
They converge. And it's in that convergence, that meeting point, that this exploration really takes place.
And it highlights something really crucial, I think. The individual self is not merely observing this paradox.
Right.
The self becomes both the seeker and the object of the seeking. It's a beautiful reflection of the interconnectedness that the text is pointing to. And this brings us to that central paradox, I think, the relationship between the unborn, the aja, and the self, aham.
Right. Because the Nāsadīya Sūkta starts by evoking this primordial state. And the imagery is so powerful. Dum asidamsa gulmgra prakita salila sarama idam. Darkness hidden by darkness. All this was undifferentiated water.
Undifferentiated. Such an evocative image.
It is, and the way Lost Veda and Nāsadīya echoes this is really interesting. With that contemplative verse in Malayalam, Jnananda yurtinini matram saruvyabiaya pragashamai. For the darkness that is I, you alone are the all-pervading light.
It presents this idea that individual identity, this I that we cling to, is, in a sense, a form of darkness.
Seeking its counterpart in the light of the unborn absolute.
Yes, and that's where the idea of interconnectedness comes in.
It's fascinating because the text aligns with this idea from the Vedas. That creation didn't arrive from a personal deity as we might conventionally imagine it.
Right, but from tapas.
Tapas? Often understood as this kind of primal heat, generative energy.
It is, and Lost Maidhi in Nāsadīya subtly reframes that concept. That impersonal tapas is presented as a kind of spiritual yearning, an inner drive within the individual.
It's like seeing the urge for creation. It lies within us.
A very powerful suggestion, and I think a key takeaway from this part of the text. Then we move into another layer of the paradox, the relationship between dissolution, laya, and the very nature of reality itself.
Which perhaps hints at Maya, that concept of illusion.
It might, and think about how the Nāsadīya Sūkta concludes, with that incredibly open-ended question. Ayam visdrashturyat abu yadiwa dedahi yadiwana. Who truly knows whence this creation arose, whether he established it or not?
Admitting the limits of our knowing.
Acknowledging it, embracing it even. And Lost Veda in Nāsadīya takes this and internalizes it in such a profound way.
It does, with that incredibly powerful line, again in Malayalam. Do I cease to dissolve into you, or do you dissolve me into yourself? It's the very essence of the seeker's struggle.
Isn't it? That questioning, that wrestling with the ultimate fate of the individual self?
Yeah. Is it merging, where we actively dissolve, or are we absorbed by the absolute? Is it surrender, or something else entirely?
And that's where the text leaves us, with that question, inviting us to contemplate the nature of our own being in relation to that ultimate reality.
So Lost Veda Nāsadīya is mirroring the Nāsadīya Sūkta in that way. It's not giving a definitive answer, it's emphasizing the mystery. Because the hymn doesn't say whether that primordial state was being or non-being, definitively.
It doesn't, and the Malayalam text carries that forward, that sense of unresolved inquiry.
And this brings us to what I think might be a third crucial element of this whole paradox, language.
Ah, yes, language itself.
Because it feels like this blended use of Malayalam and Sanskrit in Lost Veda and Nāsadīya. It's not arbitrary.
It isn't. It's reflecting something deeper, I think.
It's suggesting that language, any language, is inherently limited when trying to grasp at the unborn.
That which precedes and ultimately transcends all linguistic definition.
Like those Sanskrit terms, laya and prakasha, they point to something transcendent. Universal truths that, well, they kind of escape our everyday understanding.
They do, and then the Malayalam with its more, I don't know, intimate sound, perhaps?
Like that phrase, padake, pike.
Slowly, slowly.
Evokes this sense of gradual unfolding. The Vivarta, the apparent transformation of Brahman into the world. It
does. It's as if the very rhythm of the language is trying to capture something beyond our immediate grasp.
Beyond what we can directly conceptualize. And so, this bilingualism, it mirrors the way the hymn itself avoids naming the origin directly. Instead, it uses tadakam, that one, a pronoun pointing to something beyond categories.
Beyond duality. And the language, the text itself, becomes this kind of liminal space, existing between the personal and the cosmic, between the known and the unknown.
It does. And if we zoom out a little and look at the broader philosophical landscape, we see some really interesting connections.
We do. On the one hand, we have the Vedic perspective, with the Nāsadīya Sūkta at its heart. It presents this agnostic cosmogony, starting with a negation, an emptying out.
And the impetus for creation is tapas, this impersonal force.
Right. And the source, the tadakam, ultimately transcends all duality.
And Lost Veda Nāsadīya takes this framework, this ancient Vedic framework, and internalizes it, makes it subjective. So the interplay of light and darkness becomes this internal dialogue, the darkness of the self-seeking union with the light of the absolute.
It's beautifully done. And there's even a resonance, I think, with the Chandogya Upanishad and that profound declaration that Tamasi.
You are that. So essentially, Lost Veda Nāsadīya is taking this ancient inquiry and transforming it into a personal, meditative journey.
And it's doing so by bringing together the Malayalam with all its expressive depth.
And the Sanskrit with its metaphysical precision.
It's really remarkable, as if the text itself embodies the process of dissolution it's contemplating, with language becoming the sacred meeting ground.
Where these seemingly distinct realms, the personal and the cosmic, converge.
In quiet contemplation. And I think the real power of the text, of how we're engaging with it, lies in its conscious decision not to offer concrete answers.
It's like the Vedic sage who composed the Nāsadīya Sūkta.
Exactly. It invites us to dwell in the question, to sit with that paradox of existence arising from non-existence, without needing resolution.
So the unborn isn't this rigid theological concept. It's a living paradox that we can actually feel within ourselves, mirrored even in the languages chosen to explore it. I think that's what makes this text so captivating.
It is. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come not from finding definitive answers, but from embracing the mystery.
This deep dive into lost Veda in Nāsadīya has been, well, it's been an experience.
It has.
It's given us a truly unique lens to view these fundamental questions of being, of non-being, of the self and the absolute.
It's not just about intellectually understanding an ancient hymn. It's about feeling how that ancient questioning can resonate within us on a deeply personal level, through a different language, a different poetic tradition.
It's been a privilege to explore it with you.
Likewise. And I think it leaves us with something to consider. How can we, in our own lives, blend these perspectives?
The personal and the cosmic.
The way this text does with Malayalam and Sanskrit. Because maybe, just maybe, it's in that blending that we find new ways to approach the seemingly irreconcilable, the paradoxes that we encounter.
And perhaps the deepest insight lies not in finding definitive answers, but in, as you said, embracing the power of the question itself.
A perspective beautifully illuminated by Lost Veda in Nāsadīya.